Change your heart, change your life, change the planet.
Hey everybody, it's Tim Van Orden coming to you from the Blue Trail headed up Bald Mountain in Bennington, where I live. And I thought I'd give you another edition of what I've learned in 20 years of being vegan as I trudge up the mountain in my big boots. So excited that we still have winter here in Vermont, even though it's April 8th. We just got a couple inches of snow yesterday, and there's a lot on the ground up here on the mountain. So what I want to talk about today is that people are slow to change. This is probably the biggest lesson that I have learned in the past 20 years. And I probably learned it the most as I become a coach. And not just become a coach, but really worked hard to be an effective coach. And rather than simply sharing an ideology or sharing a philosophy of how to get people to be vegan or how to get people to exercise and be runners or run faster, my goal as a coach now is to help people be more effective and to help people be more compassionate with themselves and others, because I truly believe that that is how you become more effective. That self-compassion and compassion towards others, compassion in general, regardless of the focus, is the way to greater effectiveness. Because compassion is about widening what is acceptable. It's about widening the scope of what you will allow into your life. And that requires the ability to deal with your own feelings and to deal with discomfort, to deal with situations that you don't like, to deal with situations that just feel wrong, or that seem too effortful, or they seem unfair. So as a coach, I help people allow discomfort into their lives, and then I help them to work with it. So as a human being coaching myself as well, I put myself into uncomfortable situations on a regular basis. And then I watch, I observe, I listen to the parts of me that are not conscious. And rather than forcing them to do things, like I'm gonna force you to go up this mountain today in your big boots, I just get myself started, I crank it up, put myself in motion, and then say, okay, what shows up? What conversations am I having with myself? How is my body talking to me? And how am I talking to my body? Or how am I talking to other people? How is this moment here in the woods on the mountain related to my identity? Related to my presence on the internet, on YouTube? How is this going to affect my race resume and whether or not people listen to what I have to say, because, wow, that guy's old and he's really fast and he eats a plant-based diet, so he's somebody we want to listen to. Is that part of the conversation that I'm having today? I don't know. I want to find out. I want to tune in. What shows up in the midst of discomfort? And can I allow all of that to be there? That's compassion. To sit with suffering. That's what the word compassion means. Compate, to suffer together. Pati is suffering. So patience means the ability to be with your suffering. Sympati, sympathy. Empathy, empathy. To be compatible means that people can suffer together and they're okay. That my suffering doesn't bother you and your suffering doesn't bother me. We are compatible, and therefore we have compassion for each other. So, as a coach and as a person, My journey now is to widen my scope, to widen the conversations that are taking place by first allowing them to exist. Can I be in the midst of an uncomfortable situation and not be right or make somebody else wrong? Not reject what is, but say, this is what is, it's happening whether I like it or not. And there's a lot of feeling in me, and it's strong, and it's compelling, and it's trying to move me into action, towards or away, fight or flight, or to another F, to date. So what do I do in the midst of that? Who am I in the midst of strong emotion? Who am I in the midst of discomfort? I want to know. So back to the initial learning that I started this video with. People change slowly because change requires that you change. And what? Yeah, change requires that you change. And that sounds like a stupid statement or an obvious statement, but it's not obvious at all. Because the part of you that needs to change is the part of you that's trying to change everything else. The part of you that needs to grow and to open up is the very part of you that's consciously narrating a story of how the world is wrong. Other people are wrong. People are stupid. People are ignorant. They can't be trusted. Democracy doesn't work because they elect stupid people. The world's gone to hell. My body's gone to hell. I hate my life. Whatever the story is, whatever the narration is, the change that this part of us wants, you could call it the ego. I call it I. The change that it wants is external. It wants other things to change. For instance, if it's about your body, well, I wants to make my body exercise so that, really, really steep here. I want my body to exercise so that it changes. So I forces my body into a boot camp because I knows that it won't do it on its own. But if I have a trainer, if I have a coach, then I can be forced to do it. And I have to be forced to do it because I don't want to change. I don't want to be responsible for these things. I want somebody else to take responsibility for them. I want my body to change. I don't want to change. And this is really hard to grapple for most people because they're listening to this conversation. Maybe you are listening to this conversation with that part of you, with your conscious narrative identity, the story that you tell about yourself, the fabric that you weave that feels like your life. But that's not really who you are. It's just a story that you keep telling to yourself and to others. And you don't do it on purpose. And you don't do it because you're delusional. You do it because you're human. Our brains are built to do this. It's not a bug. It's a feature. And it's a really useful feature for our ancestors who lived in environments that were incredibly difficult and didn't have comfort and convenience like we have now. So we try to figure out ourselves and the problems of the world from the comfort of our homes or in front of a computer as we type and contemplate. But our brains were not built in those environments. Our brains did not adapt for comfort and convenience. Our brains adapted in the midst of discomfort and inconvenience. And there were no movies to go to. There was no music to listen to. There was just life, man. And it was hard. And it was nasty. And it was windy. And it was dangerous. Like where I am right now. Walking on icy rocks on the edge of a cliff. To show you the view of Bennington below. Hold on. Whoa. So here I am on the top of the White Rocks. It's a quartz outcropping. And there's the Valley of Vermont and Bennington below. And there's Mount Anthony behind me. One of my favorite places to run. But I'm not here. Actually, I'll take a short look. Yeah, it's much nicer in person. Alright, so back to our brains. We, in modern life, we process things from a privileged position. And this is a privilege that I don't hear people talking about, and I think that's unfortunate because I think we could deal with our societal issues so much better if people understood the privilege of living in the 21st century. Because holy cow, do we have it easy in the 21st century. Like what I'm doing right now. It's just extraordinary that I have the ability to do this and then share it with you around the world. And that is a privilege that I do not want to take for granted. So I put myself in environments like this one that could kill me, that challenge me. I don't have food or water. The pack on my back is just for this camera. I'm wearing heavy boots. And my boots. Oops. And it's snow, and it's a 2,000-foot climb. And I do this on purpose so that my thinking is shaped by environments similar to those that our ancestors evolved in. Ooh. So that my thinking is grounded in the real nature of existence and not in the complex environments that we now find ourselves in, where so many things are taken care of for us that we can feel like we are the victims of all kinds of atrocities that are purely conceptual. Most of the actual physical harms in our lives are long gone for the vast majority of people on this planet. Not everybody, and that's really unfortunate. But for most of us, if you're watching this, you get a pretty safe life. So, back to, again, the original statement. People don't change quickly because the part of them that really, the part of them that would make a difference if it changed is the very part that's trying to change everything else. And that is the thing that I have learned as a coach that has really challenged me and confronted me. And it's the thing that I don't have a great answer for anymore. And this is why I don't call myself an activist anymore, because I realize that the hard problem of consciousness, unlike the hard problem as defined by philosophers and neuroscience, but to me, the hard problem of consciousness when it comes to being a human being and actually being alive in a world with other people in it, is that we're not built to change, at least not quickly, and we're built to take the path of least resistance. And when we sit in our comfortable environments, the path of least resistance is often to be comfortable, to wake up and do yoga and have a green juice and then get on the internet and complain about injustice and act superior or righteous to others. And I have those thoughts. I have them. I'm human. We are built to be tribal. We are built to feel like there is an us and a them. We are built to feel right and wrong, black and white, good and bad. And we are skewed towards feeling that we're the good ones and that the bad ones are the other ones. We're built like that. And I have to constantly humble myself by doing things like this to put myself in environments, again, that can kill me. To remind me that I'm not all that. To remind me that I'm not right. I'm just a temporary passenger in a much larger system, in a much larger context. And regardless of what I accomplish, and regardless of how significant my I may think it is, this is temporary. And everything I do will eventually be forgotten, and that's okay. It's okay. That's not bad. It's not good. It just is. So, this is not the video that I intended to make, but it's what's coming out of my mouth. And that's how I do things now. I find I don't want to script things. I don't want to have a bullet point list of, here's the top 10 things I learned from 20 years of being vegan. I don't see the value in that because it's abstract, it's out of context. Context is infinitely complex and inextricably complex. Excuse me. You can think that you've got it all figured out. You can think that it's all really clear. You can think that everything makes sense. But that's it, you're just thinking these things. It's easy to think things. It's very different to actually do something with those thoughts that yields consistent results. That's a completely different animal. And that's my goal in life now, is to say, okay, I've got these high lofty thoughts, I've got these ideals. And in these ideals, there's ideal people and ideal ways of doing things. And of course, the ideal people are the ones that think like me, right? Well, because again, our brains are built to make us the star of the show. We're the protagonist, not the antagonist. Well, even if you're depressed and suicidal, you're still the protagonist. And it's an unfair life for the protagonist, but you're still not an antagonist. It's just that everything in life is just horrible and unbearable. And that's how you take control of things as the protagonist. You end it. So I want to always be present to the fact that ideals are just ideas with an L added to them. That's it. They're just ideas, they're just thoughts. They don't really have much significance in the grounded world, the material world. They're just thoughts. So let's put that thought to the test. Let's put that ideology to the test. And as a coach, all right, I'm going to coach you to be vegan, and I'm going to coach you to be really fit and run fast. But where do my ideas fall apart? You've seen this, I'm sure, in the vegan YouTube community with certain groups. I won't mention names, but certain very strongly opinionated vegan YouTubers saying if the diet doesn't work, it's you that failed, not the diet. The diet is perfect. The diet is ideal, and I'm off trail. I think this is it. I'm on top of the mountain in a spruce maze. So if you're having challenges on a diet, it's because you are not ideal. You're not doing the diet the right way. There's nothing wrong with the diet. And that's an ideal. It's not tested in the real world, because in the real world you find out that, oh wow, this is actually really complex and people are different and there's all kinds of unforeseen challenges. And the world is much bigger than what I can model in my head. And I can only ever get a small, simplified version in my mind when I come up with my ideals. And this is why science always knows more than scientists. You don't look at a scientist and say, oh my God, they know everything, because they can't. It's not possible for them to know everything. They only know what they've experienced, and even that is going to be biased. So we need something outside of individual scientists. We need science. And science is very competitive. And because it's so competitive, we beat ideals down. We beat grand hypotheses down. Other scientists come along and they break our ideas. And they do it on purpose, and it seems malicious. And you always hear about people in the alternative health world, who are unfairly attacked. It's like, that's science. That's what's supposed to happen. They're supposed to tear your ideas to pieces. That's what you want. And if your ideas can handle the beating, you've got a good idea. In fact, maybe you've discovered a law of nature. Maybe you've discovered something that is true about living organisms or about life. Because it withstood the storm of criticism. But people are saying, no, I want to protect my ideas. I don't want you to touch them. I don't want you to talk about them. Don't talk about religion or politics at the dinner table. Those are safe. Those are protected. You can't touch those. Why? Why can't we touch them? Don't you want better ideas? Don't you want ideas that are more in alignment with the real world, with reality, and things that actually can help you be a more effective person in a real life, not an idealized life? Wouldn't you prefer that? I know I prefer it. But I find that I'm, or at least this style of thinking is not all that common. In fact, I find it harder and harder to have conversations with people. Not because I'm trying to make them wrong, not at all. But because I see how unwilling people are to actually talk about things in ways that they're not certain about. People ask questions, but they already have the answer in their head when they ask the question. So people rarely actually ask real questions that they want answers to. So I've just stopped answering their questions and lost interest in most conversations. Unless someone says, hey, I really want to know this. Or, hey, let's go investigate this. Let's explore this. Let's find out what's going on here. I'm all over that. But even then, I find that people already have an idea of what is and of what's going on, and they seldom want to change that. So back to the original point. People are slow to change. Because the part of them that needs to change is not the part that wants to change. Because it's a point of view. It's looking out. How does a point look at itself? It's hard to do. You have to realize that you're more than just a point of view. You have to realize that, wait a minute, maybe I'm not just my consciousness. Maybe I'm not just my perspective. Maybe I'm bigger than that. Maybe I am so much more than that. And this is what my work is now all about. Expanding my own experience through trial, tribulation, like what I'm doing right now, and through working with people who have real challenges and who are at the point where they're like, I don't want to change, but I have to change. Help me change. And man, that's a slow process, and that's a hard process. And even though they want to, they're still kicking and screaming. And we have to repeat the same thing over and over. And I try 1,000 different methods because I realize that the ideals that I have, I've got a simple tool that'll fix everything. It's a universal tool. It's a multi-tool. Works on everything. Sorry, now just in my very simple, idealized world with idealized humans that should behave a certain way and should be rational and should see the same idealized truth that I see. But that's not the world. That's just a fantasy in my head. So, back to trying to change. I now put myself into places that challenge everything that I know. And they make me feel. What I'm doing right now makes me feel things. Like my fingers are freezing holding this recorder. The phone died because it's freezing. It didn't run out of battery because it was low charge. It ran out of battery because it's about 18 degrees up here, Fahrenheit. And batteries don't last that long in those temperatures. So I'm feeling things. I'm walking up a slope that's probably 40%, very steep, and a lot of snow on the ground. So I'm feeling my legs, my lungs, my heart, and it humbles me, it grounds me. There was a point I was trying to make, and I got sidetracked, and I want to come back to it because I have a feeling of a memory that I was getting to something good, and I don't have a thought about it. I just have a feeling of a memory. It's like that tip of the tongue feeling. There's no thought that accompanies it. It's a feeling of a memory. I know it. I can feel that I know it. But it's not there. So, let's get back to people changing slowly and having people sharing ideals of perfect solutions that are going to quickly and universally change the world from the top down. I'm a fan of bottom up. I'm a fan of tinkering. I'm a fan of what I call the evolutionary approach to life, rather than the top-down, idealized, I know the perfect solution. It always works, and since you people are just too stupid to get it, you're too dumb, you're too irresponsible, you're too careless, you're too lazy, so I'm going to legislate your lives. I'm going to create a top-down system and force you into it, and it'll be best for you and everybody else. And we've seen that does not work. Quite the opposite. It's horrific. The greatest atrocities of the 20th century can be attributed to that style of thinking. So now, the more I learn, the more I see my previous vegan idealism, or raw food idealism, even more so, because even vegans were stupid. Even vegans were inferior. Like 99.999% of the world was just completely ignorant and stupid and inferior. And me and my raw vegan army were going to prove it and shame you into changing. Wow. I'm not embarrassed that I had those thoughts. I don't regret them. I learn from them because I see that that's in me. I see that even though I consider myself a compassionate, kind person, and the label I used to give myself when I was very young was that of the diplomat, because I was always putting out the fires in my family. A very volatile family life, and I was the diplomat, I was the peacemaker. And then later in life, as I started going to self-help seminars and like Landmark Education and Tony Robbins and things like that, I learned that I am an accommodator. And at first this was, well, no, not at first, but for a very long time, that acknowledgement that I am an accommodator and I will always accommodate others, even at my own peril. I will fix them in order to avoid conflict, in order to avoid confrontation. Don't worry, I'll make the pain go away. I'll take it. Make it about me, yell at me. Just make it stop for everybody else. It's too uncomfortable. But I can handle it. So I accommodate. You can't handle it. You can't handle your discomfort. So I'll handle it for you. Just go ahead and abuse me. I'll be the doormat because I'm good at that. And you probably aren't. So I'm going to make your life easier. That realization was crippling. I dealt with depression unconsciously for most of my life up until that point, largely because of how I would feel after being an accommodator and a doormat. And I've got Me Too stories that I'm not going to share, where I accommodated men and even women in situations that were incredibly uncomfortable, but there's no value in me describing that, just that there was a lot of self-loathing. But when I got this about myself, that's who I was, and I saw the mechanics of it, it was even worse. I didn't have anybody to turn to. I saw what I was, and I didn't know how to change it. And that seemed like a death sentence. Because prior to that, it was just that there are bad people in the world, and I need to make these moments safe. But then when I realized that it was me, then, wow, it's not just about finding the right person or the right partner or the right team or the right family. Holy cow, it's me, and I don't know how to stop it. And I would just watch myself get into these situations where I would accommodate again and again and again. And it's like, oh my God, I don't ever want to do that again. And holy crap, here I am doing it again. And I hate myself. And I just want to die. So that manifested in all manner of things, depression, thoughts of suicide, hatred of other people. I became a misanthrope for quite some time. I would never hurt people. I don't have that ability, but man, I would hate them, and I would accommodate them. Like, I'm pretending to like you right now. I'm smiling at you, but I can't stand the smell of you. I had a lot of that, and I brought that into veganism with me. And again, I don't regret it. I see where it comes from now, and I see how the pain led to that, and my own inability to deal with discomfort, my own discomfort and discomfort around me. I had to diffuse it, and taught me some great skills. And I'm actually grateful that I have those skills now. I have the ability to be a diplomat, but I don't need to be a doormat anymore while I'm being a diplomat. I can actually be quite powerful and empowered, and take a stand and be compassionate and gentle in that stand, even as people are coming at me with a great deal of hostility and violence. I can be compassionate and firm and not reactive, but responsive. So back to people not changing. We think it's so easy. If they could just be vegan, if they could just see the harm they're causing, if they could just this, if they could just that. But it's that word just, because that word just assumes that there's a just world and that we live in it. And it's just that people are clueless, and the world would be just if they would just figure it out. And if they would just listen to me, because I have the answers. And they're not listening, so I'm just going to yell louder. And they're not listening, so maybe I need to force it on them, and they're not listening. So I'm going to get a whole posse of people, and we're going to yell at them and shout them down, and they're not listening. So let's attack them, and let's publicly shame them online, and let's destroy their lives. And so this is what I call weaponized activism, where my discomfort and my belief in a perfect world causes me to not see my own tactics, to not see my own inability to handle things that are challenging. Other people should be able to handle them, but I can't, and that's okay. We're not talking about me right now. We're talking about you, and you're an animal killer. And that's all that matters. Your inability to face the truth. And I'm going to make you face it. This is where activism or veganism gets weaponized and becomes incredibly dangerous. And this is why I think the term veganism is an oxymoron. And I think people have a misunderstanding of what the term oxymoron means. Oxy means sharp or pointed, and moron comes from moros, which means dull or foolish. So oxymoron really means pointedly foolish. You'll hear some people say that it means sharp dull, like it's the two opposites that are next to each other. And in a sense, it is. And because in people's minds, they think they're sharp. They think they're smart. They think they got it all figured out in their minds, in the idealized fantasy or simulation in their heads, in their polarized conversations around the table, in the midst of lattes or whatever, or beers, whatever it is they're drinking, as they rile each other up in that idealized world. Wow, that's sharp, man. But then when they try to go out and implement it, and when they actually speak these things, and there's no effect, there's no change when people hear these things, you realize how dull they are. And they think they've got a sharp knife and they're going to cut through the world with their rhetoric or with their ideology, but in reality, holy cow, they've got a loaf of bread in their hand, and it's really dull, and they're beating people with a loaf of bread and they don't even see it. And this is being pointedly foolish. Like, you can't see how dull your arguments are because you're drunk on their ideological sharpness. You're drunk on the polarized conversations you have in safe spaces about them. But things that are really sharp in the real world are not created in safe spaces. They're forged in fire. They're hardened by life and by time. And they're peer-reviewed, which means they're tested, they're challenged, they're broken, they're stepped on. Oh, you think that knife is sharp? I'm going to break it. And it's the knife that finally can't be broken after everybody tries to break it. That's the one that's really sharp. Not the one that you dream up and then you manufacture using a complex system. Well, what happens when that complex system goes away? Like, well, I can engineer the perfect knife blade. Yeah, really? Did you engineer the mining and the machinery that mine the minerals and the refining of those minerals and the transportation of those minerals and the manufacture of the machines and the robotics that went into shaping and carving? And what about the computer that you designed it on? What about the university that you learned physics in and engineering principles? Did you build all that? Did you create any of that complex system that now allows you to believe that you can create a perfectly sharp knife blade? No, you didn't. And this is the illusion that we live in, again, in the comfortable modern world. We think because we live in a complex system and we have complex tools that we ourselves are complex and that our ideas are complex. But the reality is our ideas are so scaffolded by systems that have been in place for a really long time. Systems that young people rail against because they call them the status quo. Well, that status quo is the scaffolding for your ideas. It's allowing you to have those ideas. It's creating the safe spaces, or created the safe spaces. Carve them out of the wilderness for you to have the very thoughts that you're having now. Fought wars over them. And you're saying they all have to go. They all have to be thrown asunder. The whole thing needs to be overturned. Holy cow, is that arrogant? But that's the world we live in, where the more protected we become, and the more polarized we become, the more idealistic we become, and the more we think our top-down solutions are the answer, and then we need to force them on other people. without any acknowledgement at all of how scaffolded we are by the systems around us that have been built by tinkerers, not by top-down thinkers. The top-down systems have failed. We saw that in the 20th century with the fall of communism. And any communist regimes that are left over are only because individual ideologues have not died yet. Not because the systems work. It's clear that they don't work. So veganism is an oxymoron because as an ideology is pointedly foolish. Unless it simply means that you choose to do as little harm as possible when you consume food. And also the acknowledgement that in order for you to do that, you live in a world that's scaffolded. You live in a world that allows you to get fruit from around the world. 24 hours a day, at least here in the United States. I can go to a supermarket, even though I live in a small town in Vermont, and even though I'm on top of a mountain right now, trudging through the snow. There's a supermarket a couple hours away. I mean, by foot. When I walk back down the mountain and get in my car, in a couple hours I can get fruit that was grown who knows where. So I can be a vegan, I can eat a plant-based diet, but if that supermarket wasn't there, if the town wasn't there, and it was me standing here right now in the same spot, when I got down to the bottom of the mountain, there wouldn't be any food for me. Nothing's growing. I could eat pine needles to get some vitamin C. I could probably dig up some roots, but even that would be hard. The ground's frozen. It was 15 degrees at my house this morning. It was 16 degrees yesterday morning. So digging up tubers, and how many people in town would be able to live on tubers underground? Not many. So the population here would be pretty small. So if we lived here, what would we be eating? Animals. And that's an inconvenient truth that a lot of vegans don't want to face, is that it's our scaffolded system that's incredibly complex that allows us to be vegan, and yet vegans rail against that system and say it's all wrong and it's got to change. And that's just not an approach that's going to work. It's pointedly foolish. It makes sense in the mind, but in the real world, in real practice, can't change the world in a heartbeat, in a moment, in a step. Can't even change yourself in a heartbeat or a moment or a step. Man, the older you get, the more you realize how difficult change is. And the more you realize you need help along the way. And that's what coaching is for me now. It's me saying to people, all right, I can't fix everything for you right now, but we can work together and slowly, gradually, step by step, acknowledgement by acknowledgement, disappointment by disappointment, discomfort by discomfort, we can slowly shape the structure of your brain, the structure of your physiology on a cellular level, on a neuronal level. And eventually, you'll have different habits. You'll be a slightly different person. You will tend in a slightly different direction more of the time, and you will be more focused on doing things that tend to you rather than doing the things that you tend to do because you've always done them. So it's about creating stability, and stability does not come from the top. If you build the tower from the top, it's not going to be stable. It's going to come crashing to the ground because there's no foundation yet. It's just trying to assemble blocks in the air. And you can only do that if you have scaffolding. You can only start building the roof or the shining tower, the pinnacle. You can only build that if there's a lot of scaffolding that will support the pinnacle because there's nothing underneath it yet. But if you start building a foundation, if you start getting into the dirt, into the nitty-gritty, into the ugliness of life, and look and see what the world is really made of on a physical, material level, then you're like, oh yeah, I can put a couple rocks on top of each other, and now I can stand a little bit higher. I can see a little more clearly. I don't need scaffolding. But those top-down ideas, they have to have scaffolding and people don't see that. They focus on the pinnacle. Look at the pinnacle! Look at that shining mast on the top of my building. Wait a minute, what building? What mast? I don't actually see anything because you haven't done anything. You're just talking. You're being pointedly foolish. You're an oxymoron. Or you're sophomoric. A sophomore, similar. Sophos, which means wise. Moros, again, which means dull or foolish. So a wise fool, which is what most young people are as they start coming into adulthood. They are incredibly opinionated and self-assured, but man, they don't know much yet because they haven't done much yet. They have ideas. It's all conceptual. I'm going to be this when I grow up. How do you know what you're going to be when you grow up? You haven't grown up yet. How do you know what you're going to do in the world? I'm going to change the world. Really? You don't even know the world yet. You haven't even met the world yet. You're going to change it? Who says it needs to be changed? Why don't you change yourself first? Why don't you change your diapers? And do that a lot until you really understand what it's like to deal with shitty situations, because your parents had to do that. Your parents not only had to deal with the shit of their own lives and making money and having kids, but they had to deal with your shitty diapers on top of it. Meanwhile, you're a child whose brain is growing greater and greater in arrogant complexity. And then it finally gets out of the diaper stage and it's like, I know better than everybody. Really? I don't think you changed your diaper once. And you're going to say you know how to deal with shitty situations. And that's not to fault youth. It's just, you have to acknowledge that. You have to acknowledge the ignorance of the conscious identity and how dangerous it can be in a world where we are protected by our complex systems. It's those complex systems that allow us to have any freedom at all. But yet our minds don't see that. They refuse to see it because they want to believe that they've got all the answers. So it's a long one. And I think I'm going to stop there because my fingers are probably frostbitten at this point. They are so frozen. And I'm looking south from the summit of the mountain down towards Mount Greylock in Massachusetts. And it's really spectacular. But I've got to get my fingers warm before I lose them. All right. See you soon.